All right, we're going to start with a quick flip lesson. It should be about 20 minutes, just to get you used to reading through chapter 6. And we're going to continue working with ratios, although most of this is a little easier than what we've been working on in class. The purpose of this lesson is to get you to be able to read through the book. So the first thing that you're asked in the book is to be able to write ratios, the following ratios, in as many ways as you can. And what that means is the author wants you to be able to understand that you could write ratios with English words, like saying 4 to 2, like this ratio 4 boys to 2 girls is written. But you could also write that with a colon. When you write it with a colon like this, you still read it as 4 to 2. And finally, you could write it with a fraction, which you also see sometimes in fraction form, and you would still read that as 4 to 2. So for example, if you look at this page here, your author is asking you to take a simple ratio like 12 to 7 and write this ratio 2 different ways. So you're writing 2 different ratios that are equal to the given ratio, to this ratio. So you have colon form. So another way to write this is 12 to 7 with English words, or with a fraction 12 to 7 with a fraction bar. So these directions here are the same directions you would see in your textbook, and they will have you practice with a few problems. Similarly, another set of directions in your textbook that you might see is to not just have you write ratios in different forms, but to actually have you write ratios in simplified form. So when you see the word simplified or simplest, you have to think all the way back to fractions and take the ratio above and take the ratio that's given, like number 3, and rewrite that in fraction form and see if you can reduce the fraction. So 32 over 16 can be simplified. So we're going to take this ratio 32 to 16. First, we're going to write it in fraction form, and we're going to see if we can simplify it. So if we simplify, we look to see if there's common factors, like, for example, 4. 4 goes into both 32 and 16. So 32 divided by 4 is 8, and 16 divided by 4 is 4. After we take that step, we look to see if we need to continue to simplify. And since 8 and 4 have a common factor, we continue to simplify. So this time, maybe you notice that 2 goes into both 8 and 4. So 8 divided by 2 is 4, and 4 divided by 2 is 2. Once again, you look at your new ratio and see if you can continue to simplify. Since 4 and 2 both have a common factor of 2, you divide by 2. 4 divided by 2 is 2. 2 divided by 2 is 1. That's our final simplified form. Before you jump to the next problem, always look back at the original problem. If the original problem is written with a colon, your final answer needs to be written with a colon. So we take our reduced form of 2 to 1, and we write our final answer back in colon form, 2 colon 1. So whenever you're asked to write a ratio in simplest form, just think about reducing fractions. Let's practice one more time with 36 to 48. Your first step is to take 36 and 48 and put them in fraction form. Then think about reducing. On example 3, it took me 1, 2, 3 steps to get to simplest form. If your math facts are really good, you may be able to do this in 1 step. For example, I know that 36 has 12. 36 and 48 both can be divided evenly by 12. So 36 divided by 12 is 3, and 48 divided by 12 is 4. I got to simplest form there in 1 step. But remember, I want to write my final answer in the same form as the original problem. The original problem used words, so that's how I'm going to write my final answer. 3, 2, 4. Okay, let's take a look at the next page. Here, we just practice the same skill using a picture. So sometimes authors will have you look at a picture and ask you to write a ratio using a picture. And in this problem, we want to use the picture to write the ratio in 3 ways. So we're actually practicing the form that we learned on the previous page. You can look at that page. And using the picture to count the items. So if you look here, there is 1, 2, 3, 4 stars. And on problem 1, you have to write how many stars to flowers. So there's 4 stars to 2 flowers. So that's one way to write the ratio. It's asking me to write the ratio in 3 ways. So then I would just write it with a colon and with fraction form. On problem 2, it's asking you to do stars to total items. So even though we know there's 4 stars, when we count up the total items, we have 4 stars, 2 flowers, and 6 snowflakes. If you count, you'll see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 snowflakes. Altogether, that's 12 items. So we say 4 stars to 12 items. Or we use a colon, 4 to 12, or we use a fraction bar, 4 to 12. Let's take a look at the next set of directions. The next set of directions is introducing simplifying. So we talked about simplifying on this page. And now we're going to apply that. So we look at our answers above. For example, in problem 1, the ratio of stars to flowers is 4 to 2. So we're going to go back to that skill of just taking your fraction form, reducing it down, Four divided by 2 is 2, 2 divided by 2 is 1, and writing our simplest form 2 to 1. So what that means is for every 2 stars, if you look at this, for every 2 stars, if I were going to divide, oops, that's locked. If I'm going to look at my stars here, there's 4 stars, but since there's only 2 flowers, for every 2 stars, there's only 1 flower. That's what that ratio is telling us. If we tried to simplify the next one, if we simplify stars to total items, we have 4 stars to 12 total items. We reduce that down by dividing by 4. We get 1 to 3. So what that means is you have 1 star to 3 items. 1 to 3. Let's take a minute to just summarize. Right now, in chapter 6, you want to make sure that you can write ratios with colons, words, and fraction form. And you want to make sure that you can simplify your answers. And in order to simplify your answers, you're going to take your ratio and put it in fraction form, like we did here, and reduce it to get your final answer. And then, if there's a picture involved, you want to make sure you read the directions carefully. Remember, all of these items were up here originally. If there's a picture involved, you have to make sure that you take the time to count all the items carefully so you can answer questions like number 2. Okay, let's go to the harder material. This is the last 4 examples. Really, the goal is to get to bigger solving problems. Some of the problems on this page are easy and some are a little more difficult. So this first page, we look at the directions, you're finding the value, that's this question mark, that makes the ratios equal. So you have to find the missing value. We can just think of all of these problems in ratio table form. I wrote down a couple of things for you to think about. Think about ratio tables. Reduce down when you can. Ask yourself, do I need to reduce down? And ask yourself, can I build something up? So if I have to find the missing value, I'm going to think of 3/4 in a ratio table, because we work with them all the time. And my question is, how do I get to 16? Most of you by now know that you can just multiply 4 by 4 to get to 16. So in a ratio table, you would do the same thing to the numerator. Multiply 3 by 4, and you get 12. So 12 is the missing value. A ratio table is just a nice way to organize your work. So all I had to do for number 1 is think about a ratio table. Think about reducing fractions. Number 2, you don't have to do a ratio table. So the other option is just to use your math skills, and in the fraction problem without a ratio table, just think, how do you get from 6 to 36? So most of you can answer by now that you're going to multiply by 6. So you would do the same thing down here. You would multiply 12 by 6. And when you multiply 12 by 6, you get 72. So that's the missing value. In other words, you just do the same thing to the top as you did to the bottom, just like we do all the time in ratio tables. But when you get to the problems below, they're a little harder. That's what this list is really for. So think about ratio tables, try to find the missing number, start with the ratio table, and if you can't find an easy way to get from 12 to 15, see if reducing down can help. So sometimes reducing helps. I can divide both of these by 4. So when I divide by 4, I get 3 and I get 4. And my goal is to get a 15 on the top. I want to get a 15. So how do I do that? Well, I look at my ratio table on my second step and I ask myself, can I get to 15 yet? And in this case, I can. I can multiply 3 by 5 to get my 15, which is my goal. So that means I just need to do the same thing in the denominator and multiply 4 by 5, which gives me 20. So the question mark, the missing value, is 20. So what that tells us is 12 over 16 is the same as 15 over 20. And the reason is they both reduce down to 3/4. I can divide this by 4, like I did above, and I get 3/4. And I can take 15 over 20 and divide each of these by 5 and get 3/4. And so they're both equal to 3/4, which means they have to both be equal to each other. Okay, this last problem's a little bit harder. I put it in there as a bonus kind of challenge level. So in order to get the missing value here, I'm going to think about ratio tables. 7 over 56. I'm going to try to reduce down, see if it helps. I can divide by 7. And I get 1/8. And then I'm going to try to build up. Remember, the goal is to get a 280. I want to get that 280 in the bottom. So sometimes when I start a problem, I don't come to a quick answer. So I might just ignore the 1/8 and try a different strategy. So I know that 56 is 2 times 28. So my next idea is to multiply by 10 to get 560. So I'm going to multiply the 7 by 10. I get a 70. Remember, this is a bonus level problem for right now. Now, I can get from 560 to 280. Maybe you've guessed why. Because I can divide by 2. I'm going to divide 70 by 2. And that gives me 35. That's my missing value. That's what's the question mark. That is what is in place of the question mark. Okay, that's where we're going to stop. Come back with questions tomorrow, and we'll try this homework in class.